Okay, Torah concept in the New Testament, put on the armor of light. So Paul exhorts believers in Romans 13:12 to put on the armor of light, a metaphor for living in holiness and truth and righteousness as protection against darkness. While the Torah doesn't use the exact phrase, it does contain parallels where Israel is called to clothe themselves in holiness, light, and covenant obedience, often expressed through garments and purity and divine protection. So the Torah parallels, Exodus 28, priests are clothed in holy garments. Garments symbolize consecration and representation of God's holiness, and anticipates Paul's metaphor, believers put on light as priestly identity. Numbers 15, the tzitzit on garments are to remember God's commands, as clothing is tied to covenant obedience and visible holiness, which parallels the armor of light as a visible reminder of living in God's ways. Exodus 13:21, God leads Israel by a pillar of fire and light. Divine light as protection and guidance reflects Paul's imagery of light as defense against darkness. Deuteronomy 6, and bind God's words on the hand and the forehead. This is similar to the armor of light as a spiritual defense through God's truth. Deuteronomy 33, verse 29, God Himself as a protective armor, a direct parallel to Paul's metaphor of armor as divine protection. Exodus 19, verse 6, Israel as a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. Paul reframes this as believers put on light as their covenant identity. So the key observations here is that the Torah emphasizes clothing and light as holiness. Priests wear a garment of consecration. Tzitzit remind Israel of God's commands. God's presence is manifested as a light and a fire. Paul spiritualizes the imagery. Instead of garments of physical light, believers put on the armor of light, Christ's righteousness and truth as spiritual protection. So both the Torah and Paul stress that covenant identity requires visible holiness and divine protection against darkness. And the Torah equals, it speaks of the holy garments and the tzitzit and God's light in the wilderness, while Paul urges believers to walk in God's ways, to live our lives according to Christ and His teachings, and that these things parallel one another very nicely. And again, this is how Paul taught Torah in the New Testament. The Torah has not passed away.